Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Milrad. I'm the founder of Movie Karma. We're the nonprofit organization that created our podcast, Rewriting Hollywood, which is focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as representation and social impact in Hollywood, really looking at the power of storytelling and how it can be harnessed for social change and social good. Today, I'm excited to have a special guest who is joining us, Oscar nominated for her project, My Year of DICKS, which is probably the best title I think ever of any film made, but also it's just a fantastic project. Her name is Pam Ribon. She's a creator, writer of this project. Pam, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. This is nice. Thanks. Hi.
Absolutely. So, for the folks who haven't heard of the film, just to quickly intro it, this film, A Year of DICKS, details the journey of a 15-year-old Texas girl in 1991, who, of course, was you, on her journey to lose her virginity through the prism of five guys who kind of make that experience very awkward, among other things. I know it's also based on your very successful, critically acclaimed memoir, which was very well received, called Notes to Boys and Other Things I Shouldn't Share in Public. I have a lot of questions for you, Pam. So I guess let's dive in.
Okay.
Again, you're Oscar nominated. Congratulations on that for this animated short. Tell us a little bit, if you would, Pam, just about your journey, for folks who aren't familiar with your book and how this project just kind of came to life.
Well, the memoir came out in 2014, which came out of, I guess I've been writing letters for a very long time as a form of entertainment, mainly for myself. But when, I don't keep a diary or something, so I would write letters and notes. I moved around a lot. I went to 13 schools. So by the time I was in high school, I was really more familiar with a pen pal than a diary. So I wrote a lot of notes to boys, and I kept all the first drafts. And then at some point, I started reading them at book signings and things like that. My friend Liz Feldman and I had created a show called Letters Never Sent, like way back, that we performed at the Aspen Comedy Festival. So using confessional letters as a form of comedic therapy is in my wheelhouse, so to speak. And so what happened was FX had met with me about doing something in the animated space. And we were just looking into things that I had that we could adapt. And Megan Reed suggested Notes to Boys, particularly being able to bounce around in an animated in the genres. And that was very appealing to me, to make a piece of animation that I hadn't really seen before. I am not an animator or an artist in that way at all. And that is when I got paired up with the extraordinary Sara Gunnarsdottir. And she brought in Jeanette Janine, who actually had recommended the two of us together to begin with. So all three of us found each other both by being fans and taking the opportunity to work together on this project.
So cool. And Sarah did an incredible job as director, and you did, of course, as well in creating this and being so vulnerable. You've worked, I understand, in animation as a writer on Ralph Breaks the Internet and Moana, among others, and also in live action. I'm curious, as you mentioned this is very genre bending, and it really is. I think it's something Sarah's talked about as well. Talk about just some of those different genres you weaved in, and why was that approach important to you, or because it's so interesting. I saw there's also in your behind the scenes footage, you talked about, vampire Pam, we see kind of anime Pam. There's just different versions of you and different genres kind of in this piece. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and that had come from the idea of moving around the genres was in the script, was in the initial pitch, so that we could really go into that time when you're, well, not just when you're a teenager, but I think especially when you're a teenager, you just completely reinvent yourself and go all in on this new thing that you're into and reading about and absorbing. And sometimes because the boy you like is into a thing and you've got to learn all about it, like vampire culture or anime. Now, Sada had essentially, knowing that there were all these different genres, she started thinking about all the independent artists that she had come up with, or she was fans of and friends with, and knew that she could, and asked if they would come on board, knowing that each of them could handle these special segments, but then still be a part of the core team that's animating the the piece as a whole, which is how Pam has this look to her when we're in Pam's quote unquote real life of always kind of awkwardly positioning herself, because that's a whole team working on off of Sada's animatic that she had written. She hand drew on paper with pencil. And then she uses reference footage to kind of compile together how it works, so that when you move into these genres, it's such a big shift into what Pam is hoping she can fabricate, what she's trying to imagine, so that you can see these, how you get yourself, you put yourself in these situations with the best of intentions, with the only thing you've had as information, which back then was often the books you found or the TV shows and films you'd consumed. And it could get you into a place where you were very undereducated for the experience that you were walking into. And so was the person kind of putting their body on yours, and you're all trying to figure it out. So the animation in the genre really helps keep that distance. In animation in particular, I think you can watch something and feel how it feels without feeling like you're having to watch someone else's document of pain. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it allows us, it just allows so many different entry points into the story, and it's just really compelling. It was also just like a really engaging way to watch animation, to watch a story unfold. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit too, Pam, about being vulnerable in this way, because I don't know if everyone, even if they had these kind of notes and these kind of letters and writings from when they were teenagers, would feel comfortable sharing, and being this open. Like, was that a process for you, especially as working the memoir and now transitioning to this way of telling the story, in terms of saying, I want to be vulnerable in this way, I want to share this. And were you also, as part of that, thinking about the impact it would have on young women or young girls or others watching this?
You asked more than one question, so I'm just putting them more in my head.
Yes. I can also,
but I think no, I got it. Because I'm thinking about the transition here, which originally when I would talk about these things, I would talk about them as me now kind of sharing with you the young me and what she felt, and then me going, what was I thinking? Was it this? Was it that? Why was I like this? Did I really think this would work? And in this piece, inspired by really where we were at with the state of female protagonists and young people in their agency, when you're looking at something like Euphoria, which is not my experience at all. How can I talk about my experience without it seeming like some sort of back in my day lecture, which I didn't want to do at all. So getting a narrator out of there was the first step, and that felt vulnerable to me, to just let her be. And what came from that is your second question, which now I've forgotten because it did the first question.
Yeah,
which
the first question I guess it was just part two was as part of being vulnerable.
Yeah. Yes. No, I've got it. I'm back on. So I feel like the part where you really can see the difference in me reading them at a staged reading, or even the way the memoir presents it, of here's this moment I totally threw myself over a boy whose name I didn't know. When Pam is in the closet in Un Girl's Penis, talking to the imaginary boy that she had in her head, while the actual boy is doing to her what she had hoped would happen. That disconnect that the character Pam gets to have, of looking at him and going, why doesn't this feel right? And he answers, why are you not who you know I can be? Which is, we're playing in French noir, new wave, and all of this. But I think that right there is a very vulnerable part of me. That is like what I was doing. And to be able to talk about that is how I felt. That feels very vulnerable. And the line there that shows why it has to be animated is, you aren't laughing exactly right there, but it's absurd. And within this genre of this level of importance, of like a Calvin Klein obsession ad, but also her virginity and her hopes and dreams. And is this really a memory that she wants? Because she's looking for a great memory. And here she is, so up in her head, and nobody that's on her or touching her seems to care where her head is in all of this. And this is where it's at when you aren't paying attention to the person whose body you're using. And that, I think, is stuff I never would have known how to talk about. And I'm only now finding ways to talk about within this kind of work. In animation, often that's still not how female bodies are talked about or treated, or a protagonist story who's feminine. Like, if she's a female identifying person, what does that mean? You know, and I can just keep going because
really
it keeps getting harder and harder to be a female protagonist in something, or to just be a female identifying protagonist of your own life. It gets harder and harder because they stop asking what you're thinking and they just start telling you what you can and cannot do.
Right, which you see in that film, and you could say based on your own experience being a teenage girl and going through that, of guys just kind of being like, hey, this is what I want. This is like, let's just do this or, you know, can you make happen what I want, essentially?
All the way to her dad, as we learn through this.
Right. What is the impact of that been? I mean, imagine you've heard from, as you've been at, I saw South by and lots of different festivals. Like, what have you heard from, especially young women or young girls who watch this, in terms of how it connects to their experience or the impact of seeing this on screen?
Yeah, it's been, well, I'm not talking right away because I kind of feel like that's their private reactions and experiences. So I'm trying to figure out a way to say I've observed a range of reactions that go from pretty private and personal and quiet to private and personal and emotional. And so I know that it can tap into something past nostalgia and into that little secret space that you felt like no one would understand this, which is how I feel about when I see that moment that I'm talking about in the closet on the floor. There's a moment that, how could I ever imagine, if I think about me back then when it was going on, I can't imagine what's happening right now that I'm talking to you about it and why. And that is a unique kind of vulnerable, because it's almost like I'm now having to find a landing point for the curiosity and loneliness I had when that moment was happening. That's a long time to wait. And I think sometimes I can see the film connecting with people that way of, gosh, that was something I thought I was never supposed to tell anybody about, or I would somehow be in trouble for it. When really all I was doing was laying very still and quiet and waiting for something to stop happening.
Yeah, I mean, so layered and so deeply personal and powerful in so many ways. And I think I could imagine a lot of people are grateful that you shared your story in this way, because it allows the conversation at least to happen, and that sense of shame that I think a lot of people do feel around sexual experiences, particularly women and girls, I would say. But
in trying to make that moment be not triggering, honestly, to keep it right at the edge of I'm still in her point of view here. I'm not leaving it. I'm not judging it. I'm not yelling at her to do something because some version of her psyche is already doing that. And that is the struggle that we have in our reality of, your gut is saying, do this one thing. And then the rest of your gut is going, isn't it though? Isn't this what you want? Isn't this it? Is this it?
Right.
Yeah. And trying to keep shame out of that moment, but where does shame fit in because of that moment after that for her? It does set everybody on a path, whether or not and it's never really spoken of again. but it does set a path for the rest of the film.
Yeah, it really does. There's this sequence on the film, not to give too much away, but with your dad, which has been talked about, I'm sure, a lot, which I understand really happened, where he's talking to you about your, in this really kind of, I guess, really awkward way about, sex and what sex it is and so forth, and how, I guess, when and how you should have it, or how you should have it. And I was struck by that too, because it's, I'm sure a lot of folks will connect to that in different ways, but there is that aspect of feeling, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if you'd comment on how your dad talked to you about this, but there is, I think, wrapped around a lot of these conversations with our parents when it comes to sex, of shame or fear, or from both sides, or uncertainty. I mean, I could certainly say as a gay kid growing up, like, I had great parents, but I wouldn't say they were prepared to really talk to, like, you know what I mean, about like, okay, like, how do you identify, having that conversation. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's only while you're saying this that I thought to myself, well, had my dad planned that? Was he thinking like, one day I'll have to give a sex talk?
Right.
I have a daughter, how am I going to talk to her about it? Or was that all like off the cuff? I've never wondered if he had prepped for this before, because his openers were so specific. But I think that he just wanted to make sure. I really do think he wanted to knock me off wherever assuredness I had in what. By the way, I never asked for anything that was happening. I would have never, ever asked for that. Ever, ever. And I had no ability to ask him to stop either, which I wish, like, just a couple of years older me would have been like, this is, we're gonna, that's a wrap on Dad's sex talk. Yeah. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks for sharing.
We're going to stop now. Yes. For all of us, honestly. Right. But he liked to be the expert whenever he was talking. So I think a lot of that was just making sure that he had asked enough questions that you were going to be quiet, and he was going to be able to TED Talk right through it. And I do genuinely think he was like, this is my daughter's intelligent enough that if I can explain to her it's not really a thing you're going to like, she'll believe me. Right. And I did. I really did for quite some time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he is very specific, and there's certainly a style that maybe we haven't quite seen, at least on film.
I don't recommend it. And I have had one person say, I wish my dad would have done that for me. And never would have ever expected anybody to say that, because usually they say, I'm so glad that never happened to me. And to that even then, like, we have such a horrible spectrum of how we come to learn about sex and pleasure and body parts and what they do, that some would have wished for this version to at least have some knowledge of, well, it would have been nice to know to start with oral sex. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is his advice. Like, start with oral. Yeah, okay. I can only imagine. I mean, you captured that animation, how you would be feeling in that moment as he's describing that. I wanted to ask you, I mean, just a follow-up to that, like, why do you think that is? I guess pulling back a little bit more broadly in terms of, why do you think there is so much? Maybe it's changing a bit now. I'm not yet a parent, so I will maybe have more context one day, but on this, but why do you think there has been, or maybe still is, so much squeamishness or awkwardness around these topics of talking to young people? I would say particularly, at least in the US, of how do we talk to them? When do we talk to them? What do we tell them? And yet we're all here essentially. I mean, most of us, at least, because of sex of some form. This is something I'm missing. Well, and maybe
no, you don't. No, you don't have to have any sex.
Yeah,
actually, yeah.
There are some exceptions to that, but like, what are your thoughts on that? Why is there so much still uneasiness around it?
I mean, I think we're fortunate to live in a country where you even get to talk about it at all, because that's not the case everywhere. And particularly if you're not trying to have a child, and like that's not why you're wanting to have sex. There's it's very little. I like that there's now at least a space for, like, even that something like this is controversial is kind of confusing, isn't it? Because we've seen the male version of Trying to Lose Your Virginity. That's what I grew up with watching. Not like
right.
The amount of boobs I had seen by the time I'm my kid's age, and she doesn't get exposed to nearly as much as what was just my like daytime options. So I, perhaps it's the change of sex as being something made that is there to make a man stimulated so that sex happens. Now it is a little bit more about who are you, and
right.
and sexuality is part of who you are, whether or not you are asexual all the way to I am so sexual, and that can be separated from roles, from even pronouns. But it's just that it shouldn't be all wrapped up in, it is a portion of, but not your reason for, because your sexuality isn't your reason for procreation.
Right.
I was about to say procrastination. Yeah. We'll dive into that some other time.
We can unpack that. We can unpack that later, or with our therapist, so you can talk about that.
Might be. That's it. That is also my year of DICKS, the procrastination years.
Yes, absolutely.
But it requires stories like this where you are not just this, but that this is a comedy coming at you in a way that is like, hey, let's talk about it. Like that if it can make someone turn to someone and go, did that ever happen to you? Is the whole reason we share these stories. And someone asks me, why do you talk about it? That's why. Because the more we can say this happened to me, and someone else can go, did that happen to you? And they're like, yes, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd talk about it. We can't change anything until everybody who's been made silent through shame or fear or threats is empowered enough to come together. You can't do this alone. You can't do any of this alone.
Yeah, you really can't. And I think that's a great point about what I would take from that, the chance to build community around these topics, and to be able to talk openly and honestly, and even with that sense of fear, whatever we're feeling.
Yeah.
Whether it's a parent or a child or both, like to sort of just name that and talk about it. Honestly.
Yeah. And keep it out of shame. Because shame comes from being afraid of what someone is thinking of you, even if that person is you thinking of you, right? You can give yourself your own shame. Yeah. No one has to get involved there. But learning where it comes from, it is how you help get it off,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's where you take its power away, right? Mm-hmm. Where you kind of by naming it. I was going to ask you around like if you could go back in time, maybe even ask this question more, but you can go back in time and change how you were either talked to about sex or about virginity. Like, are there things that you wish messages that you got or ways in which you are talked about these issues and topics and things that we all go through essentially differently that you wish you could change?
Well, I don't know that it's specifically anything that happened to me. I can't think of anything that didn't happen to other people too. Right. I mean, it would have been great to not grow up being taught that how you look, sit, move, think, or talk is quote unquote making someone want to do something to you. Yes. Right. And even sit like a girl. You're like, well, I'm a girl and I'm sitting, so I am. That's it. I'm just sitting like a girl currently. Yeah. And so that idea of always watch how you look. This is not specifically feminist in any way. This has to do with, white comfort more than anything else. But how you are growing up is supposed to be broadcasting what should or shouldn't happen to you and your body. And that, I think, if that wasn't what you're taught first, certainly I grew up with oh, you're so smart, you're gonna get to marry a lawyer or a doctor. I bet I was told more than once, and I was just so young, being like, that I'm mad about that sentence. So I think maybe if I hadn't been taught like that, I wouldn't have had the desire to push against it all the time. But I wonder who we all could be if we were not having to rage against things in order to find the stories we want to tell.
Yeah, you're always pushing back. I feel like you're always pushing back in a sense, like, against all the messages from society about what you should be, or how you should look, or how you should move. Because
it's a harder path. It's a harder path to be going against the popular sentences.
Yeah.
But this was an opportunity, and I knew it from the second it came toward me. Like, this was a unique opportunity to make something very personal. And I had a story in my head of an animated story that I knew would be just very sweet, and your typical short animation before a big movie kind of fare.
Right.
But that felt like that idea I had did not need to be handled by me specifically. That I could give that idea to someone else and they would turn out something equally great and pretty much what I had in my head. I don't know that this could have come out any closer to what I had in my head without being able to make this story with the team that came together to make the story. So many of them I've known through most of my life, and so many of them I became instant admirers of, and their talent came to this in a way that it only something I think this specific and small and personal and off the grid gets its room to breathe and become what it is.
Yeah, so I love that you incorporated, I think, your cousin, you had like all kinds of folks, family and friends involved, and were able to, I saw, film them on Zoom essentially, and then animate from there. It's just like such a great organic, but also, like you said, like the story was personal and you made it in such a personal way, which seems like that was an important part for you.
Yeah, and everybody who worked on it made it in their personal way too. You really could tell that people were bringing in little parts of their younger selves.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I guess one of the last I want to ask you, Pam, was just around, virginity is obviously a key focus of kind of the motivation of yourself, your character in this film. And I just want to ask you about how that related to what we just talked about, sort of how we as a society talk about virginity, or the messages we send around virginity, or like, you need to lose it by this time, or you need to, all that stuff. Particularly towards young women and girls, but also others, right? And even the messages that young men and boys are getting, and how they have to behave around losing their virginity. And like, could you? I don't know if you want to just comment on that, but just what you feel like. I guess it really is another question: how we could change for the better some of those ways in which we talk about virginity and losing virginity, the meanings of that, because certainly, obviously, the notion of who a virgin is, obviously, it goes back for a long time in Western culture, of particularly affecting women. I just wonder if you can comment on some of those themes.
Yeah, well, that's easy, but also like even defining, like you said, defining what is losing your virginity. I have a comic book called My Boyfriend is a Bear. It's about a girl who dates a 400-pound American black bear.
Right.
And people are often like, but is she fucking that bear? And I was like, that's not what makes them have a relationship. That's not,
right.
Some people don't have missionary sex, and they are in a real committed,
happy, loving relationship,
beautiful, yes, loving partnership.
Yeah.
And this shouldn't be the thing that defines now you're a real couple. Like, that's so bizarre to me.
Right.
But it does come from years and years of deciding what is a real, quote unquote, real marriage. What is your real virginity?
Right.
And my husband the other day was like, do people still say popping your cherry? And he was like, I feel like that's the whole center of it. Like, if it's a thing that you think of has to be popped, and it's this sweet little juice, this little berry.
Right.
Ugh, like, all of it is so gross.
Right. Yeah. It's this thing that needs to be unlocked, achieved, yes, done in a certain way. Yes.
By tampon, horse, or gentleman. Right. Like, right. What? Yeah. And then on top of that, acting like it's the last thing you're supposed to know about yourself or look at or take care of. It's just such a mess. And it comes from fear of the power of the life-giving force that is the female body.
Right. Yes.
If you give us all the power, because we have all the power within to make life happen, what would happen if we were also in charge or made some decisions for ourselves?
Yeah, God forbid if that shifted. Right.
That's what they say.
Right. Right.
Yes, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I just wanted that. Thank you. I know it's a big topic, but thank you for that. I guess.
Well, it's solved. We figured it out.
We solved it. We solved virginity just in the last 3 minutes. Yeah, I guess my last question to you is just, Pam, I mean, this was a really personal project, as we talked about. It was really, it's moving. I think it has connected a lot of people. I think it'll connect with many more, see it. What kind of things are you drawn to doing next? Like, do you want to keep going kind of into the personal? Are there other things that you want to touch on in what I would say is a pretty socially impactful story that you've told here? Do you want to do something similar or go in a different vein altogether?
Well, thank you. We are hoping to get to make more My Year of Dicks, that we get to take it out as a series and make more. I mean, My Year of Dicks is only one chapter in the memoir. Oh. and everybody has a year of dicks. So at least one, I think.
Yeah, especially if you're a gay man, you have 80 years of dicks. Yeah.
Did you say 80? That does seem long.
80, yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot of dicks. Oh my God.
Yeah. Usually like in a small amount of time, like it feels like it's 80, you know what I mean? Because because we age out at a certain age, but yes.
Around the World in 80 Dicks. Yes. Perhaps. Yeah.
That should be the sequel. I'll work with you on that one. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like there's more to explore, so to speak, but I also just am drawn to new things and new experiences as well. So I find it's been helpful to not know what I'm going to do next and see where things take me. It's been a lot of fun that way. So that I'm going to keep doing that.
I love that. Yeah, this was so awesome to talk to you. And also just, I'm so glad you made this, because I think it's, like you said, I hope it's the beginning, not the end of exploring these topics, because it's, again, another space that I think we need more dialogue, less shame, more honesty, more openness, more vulnerability. And you've really pushed that door way open in such a great way. So, well, thanks so much. And thanks. I will share that with everyone, because it was a real pleasure to work together. And so we could have never guessed it would go this far, and that this many people would have a chance to see it. So it's very exciting. So thank you for talking to me about it. You're welcome. Congratulations again. I'm going to say Pam Ribon, the film is My Year of Dicks, now Oscar nominated. And looking forward to seeing what you do next. Thanks. Yeah. myyearofdicks.com. You can see it. We have it on Vimeo for a limited time. We're also touring with Oscar TV shorts. So you can look into your area if you'd like to see it on a big screen. And yeah, that's what's up with dicks. That's what's up with dicks. We'll leave it there. Thank you. That's a good tap.